What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are back with more of our Battle for Zendikar / Oath of the Gatewatch. In fact, more specifically, this is like the big finale of Battle for Zendikar, basically. We were inspired to do these, if you're unfamiliar, by our more recent trip to Zendikar and Zendikar Rising. I say more recent because we've had some interruptions, because there are a million of these stories and only 10 from each of the new sets that come out, namely Kaldheim and Strixhaven, but still.
That they don't warn you ahead of time that they're putting out.
So we end up interrupting these to do those, and we'll probably end up doing it at least one more time, just knowing how many of these stories there are. But...
Not looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, here we are. Hey, just as a reminder, if you like this stuff, if you like the stuff that we do, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. Thank you. So that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, especially on this channel. We go live twice a week, Mondays and Fridays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. If you want to see that, make sure that you have that bell rung. You'll get notifications every time. So, and thank you in advance for all of you who already have and who are going to do that. Thank you. So, this week we are here for, as I said, the big finale. It is called Hedron Alignment, and it is by Kimberly Kryness. Which, if you've, I was going to say, which if you've watched these before, Kimberly is a favorite of ours. She's good people. So,
I swooned.
This
and my neck cracked when I did it.
Wow, violent in her love for Kimberly. Our quick review at the top. Mine to start is. This is great. You know, maybe allot some time, because holy crap, it's long.
Very.
Yeah, we did not allot time, but we're here anyway. Despite the fact that we've got a lot of stuff going on. And that's not a brag, that's like frustration.
That's like oh dear God, how are we going to make this work?
So, we're doing what we can to give it the time that it deserves.
Yeah.
But just know, this one was a tough one for us.
This
is a very
the simplest thing for us to do.
But it's a very long story, and it's a very good story.
Yes.
Very good.
It's worth the read.
Yeah. Anything more to say? I know we kind of both just joined in on that. So that's our quick review at the top. The reason that we say that is because even though this is an older story, we are still here to review and not summarize. We may go into some things, but we're not going to give the story the full depth of what it deserves in terms of the storytelling aspect. So if you want to read this story for yourself, don't worry, you don't have to go searching for it. The top link in the description down below will take you to this story so you can read it for yourself. And we encourage you to do so. And then after you've read it, we would love it if obviously you would come back here and join us so that we can have that discussion with all of you, with you and your fellow commenters, etc. We really do appreciate it. So, on to the full review itself. This story started with one of the moments that I still remember to this day, even prior to having read this today. I still remembered this moment in these stories. And that was the gathering of all of the great minds of Zendikar in the lighthouse. I didn't remember exactly what happened, but I knew that there was like a collaboration and a collection of all of these like named legendary creatures and or planeswalkers. Right? And so the main ones at the beginning are Gideon, Kiora, Drana, Tazri, Nissa, and Munda. Then later comes in Jorian and Jace. Later exits Kiora. Like, a lot of things happen, but those are the named characters from Zendikar that we have seen so far that are of consequence at all.
Right.
That's it. That's all of them. Every single person who had a name that was relevant, right? Like, you didn't have, like, Zada Hedron Grinder, but that's because she didn't stay around. So, like, every major person is in this room all at the same time. And because of that, one of my favorite parts of stories like these is when you get all these people together and then see how they do or do not get along. So that's a hell of a thing. I also really enjoyed the moment where Jorian has come in, Jace is not there yet, and Jori is attempting to explain what occurred between her and Jace. And Gideon kind of jumps to conclusions. I mean, this whole thing, even because she's now mentioned Ulamog. And so now this whole thing has this element of hurry the hell up.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because the story's so goddamn long, but I get that aspect of it in the beginning. I mean, we'll talk about this at the end. This should have absolutely been 2 stories. It just should have been. Like, maybe because Kimberly was writing both of them, or would have written both of them, they didn't want to do that because they've had varied authors for each one of these, one after the other, and so they didn't want to do that, so they kept it. It's just very obvious that this should have been 2 stories because it was so long.
I agree.
And again,
there were so many different, like, perspectives or, like...
I wrote them down.
Yeah,
I did.
I mean, so many different characters and things like that. Like, it could have been divided into, like, 7 separate tiny stories, you know?
Yeah, it went from Kiora to Gideon to Jace to Nissa, back to Jace, back to Nissa, or back to Gideon. There might have been one in there that I missed writing down, and then there was Ebby, or whatever his name is, at the end, just to do the Ob Nixilis reveal, you know, for foreshadowing for the future.
The douchebaggery that had to occur at the end.
Well, they want you to read more, because they didn't win yet, and we know that. But, and hey, Oath of the Gatewatch had to come out, so... okay, so, but I appreciated that interaction between Jorian and Gideon, because Jorian is attempting to explain, and so Gideon, like, kind of assumes what she's about to say. And I loved the line where Gideon's like, oh my god, I'm sorry that Jace left you. You know, just because we can doesn't mean... And then Jorian interrupts him and says, no, that's not what happened. But like...
In Planeswalk.
But like, that's so funny to me.
But he did fuck with my mind.
So that's better, right? That's totally better. That was...
Not what you'd expect, but still sucky.
It was so...
Still what only a dick would do.
It was so funny to me, though. So funny. Where it was just like, you know... But Gideon, like, trying to pacify her and, like, explain away his friend's douchebaggery, right? Sorry that he did that. We can do that, but we shouldn't do that.
Right.
It's so good. Then there's Kiora. What could you say about Kiora in this story?
What can't you say about Kiora in this story?
Well, you know what I find interesting?
What a personality.
I'm looking forward to... Yes, definitely. I'm looking forward to hearing what happened with that, because after she leaves out the window and swears that she's going to take the Titan down herself, you never hear about her again. I mean, you hear about, like, the waves, right? Like, water making a lot of noise, but... That's because Ulamog's coming through the water. I assumed that it was Ulamog and his brood coming through the water, not because Kiora's doing anything at all with the Bident to kill Ulamog. So, if I recall correctly, we do find out about that, but it's like that moment of like, what the hell is happening? Why? Where she said she was going to go do all these things. She was so much talk, and then they never even thought about her again. Despite the fact that she was so vocal about, I'm going to do this on my own, who's coming with me, come on, let's just go right now, no need to plan, we're just going to use this and I'm going to win, this being the Biden.
Well, that's because Gideon said no.
Yeah. Well, Gideon said no, and it was the way that the things worked out. I wrote it down here, but basically, Tazri was vocally opposed to just going out and trying to fight Ulamog. She wanted to retreat. Right. I don't agree with the retreat, but I do agree with the sentiment of not going headlong into Ulamog for no reason. Or without plan.
Right.
But she is imploring Gideon to sound the retreat. Munda is somewhat silent, but seemingly leaning towards Tazri. Drana and Nissa, but not in the same way, are very much on Kiora's side of things in terms of, sure, let's go. Nissa, of course, being the, we can do this, we're strong, we can take care of it.
Right.
You know,
Zendikar will fight
right.
these creatures.
Right. We will work together. Whereas Drana's like, whatever, we got it, let's just go. You know, like Drana is very much like Kiora.
Right.
Of just like, sure, we can do it, no big deal. You know, and Nissa's like, well, we'll work together and we'll fight with Zendikar and the elementals or whatever, like, we'll work together. No.
And Kiora's like, any real people, maybe?
I loved that. Where Nissa's like, Zendikar and I'll join you, and Kiora's like, sure, Zendikar, cool. and like looking around the room like, cool, crazy lady. What about any other people that are here that aren't psychotic? Like, really good. Really funny.
I was just trying to say, how about any people here who aren't planes? But sure, if you want to go and say she's psychotic, then
I'm not saying she's
fight about it later.
Yeah, I'm not saying she's psychotic. I'm saying that Kiora thought that because Kiora doesn't understand that Nissa fights with the land at her side. She hadn't seen it. Kiora doesn't know any of these people. She's just showing up like, this is my Bident and I'm going to use it to kill
I'm
Ulamog.
cool. I'm going to kill the Eldrazi.
Am I wrong?
No.
So, yeah. So they argue about it back and forth, but that I love. I love all of those interactions between all of those characters, or among all of those characters, showing that like Drana and Kiora, they get each other. They like each other right off the bat. Kiora tries to form that bond with Nissa very quickly, right? Because Nissa agrees with Kiora that they should go, and Kiora's like, cool, well, I'm gonna go now. And Nissa's like, oh, okay. And like, like he's gonna go with her.
Oh, well.
Right. And Gideon and Jace keep being like, no, stay, we have to plan this out, please wait. And Nissa's like,
Devise a trap.
Right. Because Kiora keeps saying, no, let's go now, let's go now, let's go now. And before Nissa understands the trap aspect of it, she hates it.
Right.
Because she's like, I did that already. They did the whole trap the Eldrazi on this plane, it'll be fine. And it wasn't.
It was not.
Right. But then Jace explains, like, no, you trap it and then you kill it. Because Nissa actually has remorse for the idea that if you attack it and hurt it badly but don't kill it, it could run away, go to another world, and F it up worse or similarly to how they're doing it here.
Right.
Kiora is like, cool, but it won't be here.
Right.
Right? Whereas Nissa actually understands, and I mean, that's the idea of how the Gatewatch gets formed in the first place, right? That Kiora doesn't give a damn, but Nissa actually understands that that's a bad idea.
Right.
And just shoving it off to another plane is not solving the problem, even though it's not on yours anymore.
Right.
It's actually an issue.
Spreading the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not just that, but, heaven forbid there's another connection with the land that a creature has on the plane that it goes to.
Good point.
And they have to endure what she had to endure.
And they may not be as powerful as she is in being able to take them down. Because twice in this story we get the...
Or they might not have as much help.
Sure. But twice in this story we get the reminder / indication that at any moment, Nissa feels that she absolutely could, with Zendikar at her side, just go take on Ulamog by herself. Later on in the story, it's, look, if I have to, I will. Whereas towards the middle, she's like, sees Ulamog and she's like, all right, this is my time, I'm gonna go. Wait, I've done this already, it didn't work, let's try it differently. And yet, so she learns in that way. So she's growing as a character, which is super important. But you still see that moment later on in the story where Jace mentions that he doesn't have contingency plans and he's upset about that.
Right.
Nissa has a contingency plan. She's like, I will go and do what I have to do to mess this thing up. You just tell me when and where.
Right.
That's awesome.
Well, she's fucking pissed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes you don't have to be that powerful. You just have to be that pissed off.
Well, I'll say, right, she cares about Zendikar, the plane. She cares about Zendikar, the land, and the ley lines, and etc. I did not get the indication, maybe I'm wrong, but I did not get the indication that she meant that she would do that in defense of the Zendikari people. It was more in defense of the world of Zendikar as a whole, which, sure, the ends justify the means, right? Like, if you save the plane, you save the people.
Right.
And Gideon was much more focused on the people than the world, right? It was just, I will stand here on this rock and fight back Ulamog alone so that everybody else can get away. And that's people as opposed to the world. So you still have both sides of that coin. You have the world and you have the people with their own champion, so to speak, standing up for them and voicing their support for them. But I find it interesting that it is so heavily a delineation because, you know, as Jace finds out, nobody really sees the world like Nissa sees the world.
Right.
And Jace learns that, which...
Well, she just knows that the world is as worth defending as the people are.
Right, absolutely. If not more so in her opinion, I'm sure, but...
Well...
You know.
I think she's intelligent enough to know that despite her feelings that the world deserves it more than the people, I think she's intelligent enough to know that the people deserve it too. Mm-hmm. You know, she's not just sitting there going, you know, she's not pulling a Kiora and just sitting there going, well, I'm gonna do this because the world needs me, mm-hmm. you know.
I have a Biden, right. And that's all that matters.
I have an Ashaya, and that's all that matters. No,
nice.
So, you know, I mean, she wants to save the Zendikari people. The way to do that, in her mind, is to save the world. And I think that she just, she kind of sees the big picture a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And I think the guys, Jace and Gideon, see the minutia a little bit more than she does.
Speaking of Jace, I thought it was a little odd, and it seemed like they tried to explain it away with like one sentence, but I don't know that I necessarily buy it. Jace shows up to this lighthouse, unless they did something when they changed perspective where like a lot of time passed, but I don't think so. Jace shows up to the lighthouse seemingly minutes after Jorian does.
Right.
But when Jace turned Jorian around, Jace then went to the Eye of Ugin, had all of his discussions with Ugin in the Eye, studied the Hedrons and to understand them, then turned around and had to go all the way back to Seagate.
Well, can he planeswalk to a different location on the same plane?
No, but he could like go to Ravnica and then back. I don't know if he did. Like he could planeswalk from Zendikar to Ravnica and then back to Zendikar. Okay. He'd be somewhat tired, and they didn't really talk about that.
Then where he would like then be able to decide the location that he would.
Right. As far as I know, yes. As far as I know, yes. Let us know your thoughts in the comments as well. What do you think about that? I found it odd that like Jorian would have had such advance notice or such like a head start, I guess is the term I'm looking for here. And with the fact that she was supposed to be Jace's guide, you would think that the trek back would be so much harder for Jace than it was for Jorian, and yet, like I said, that sentence later on was like, Jace sees Jorian and notices that she looks pretty rough, like she had a rough trek of it, or whatever. So, yeah, I think the best guess that we could have is that Jace planeswalked from the Eye to somewhere, wherever is irrelevant, because it will be infinitely safer than Zendikar, and then planeswalked back to Zendikar. And he said, expecting that he would need to help Gideon get the army together or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, who knows? Okay. But that's my only guess. Because otherwise, how did he show up so soon after Jorian? That makes no sense.
Right.
So that's my only guess. And like I said, if people have thoughts, please let us know down below in the comments. About anything that we talk about today, by the way. But I liked that when Jace showed up, that Gideon like claps him on the shoulder, because Gideon's like, this was something that I was actually impressed with during this whole situation with everybody in the lighthouse. Gideon was so, when we were looking at the scene from Gideon's perspective, Gideon was so nervous. He's like, do I do this? Do I not? I would like to wait for Jace, but we're not going to have enough time, especially now if Ulamog's coming, like we have to do this thing soon. I need to make this call. And thank God Jace shows up. And
because convenience.
But Gideon has that moment of like running over and like grasping Jace. Like, you know, like a thank God you're okay, but also thank God I now can look to you to help me with this call.
I'm grateful for the fact that you're here in this moment.
Yeah. And, well, I think you know, this comes much later in these Gatewatchy stories, but Jace and Gideon are each other's checks a lot. You know? Like, Gideon makes a call and then kind of, like, glances over at Jace, and Jace, like, you know, if he disagrees, he'll call it out, and then Gideon's got to either defend it or modify his position based on what Jace said.
Right.
So this may kind of be where that's starting. There are a couple of things that foreshadow stuff that's going to go on ahead, or at least begin that dichotomy with two different characters or whatever. But Gideon slaps Jace on the shoulders and then says, "Jace was always so tense."
Yeah.
Yeah. he's got a lot on his...
He's a mind mage.
Yeah, he's got a lot on his mind. So...
He's got a lot on other people's minds.
I was very impressed by the fact that Gideon was always internally nervous, never outwardly nervous.
Yeah.
And that was in that room in the lighthouse, but also when we're looking from Jace's perspective later, when Gideon's fighting Ulamog, and Gideon's like, "Jace, are we good?" And Jace notices that, like, Gideon didn't sound strained in any of the words that were coming out of his mouth. But if you stopped and looked, he was straining over the fight with Ulamog, whether it's, you know, putting up his invulnerability shields, slashing with his Surl, keeping track of where all the arms and stuff are coming from. And yet Gideon's just like, "Hey, we good?" Like, just so, like, it's...
That's what I'm worried about right now while I'm, like, killing fucking Ulamog.
Well, he's definitely not trying to kill him, that's the point. He's just fighting him back.
He's doing stuff to him.
Exactly. So, but that I appreciated. I thought that was great with like that whole idea of Gideon being as stoic on, not being as stoic on the inside as he appears on the outside, which is so much more realistic for how it would be. Like, if you have somebody like that, there's no way that they're, unless they're like, oh God, what's the word? Is it sociopath? What is that the word? Where, like, they don't, someone who, like, has no concept of the fact that they should be uncertain about certain things, that they're just like, "I'm the best, it doesn't matter." Like, you know, like, I think that's a sociopath. I could be wrong. I don't know that definition. I'm not a mental health professional. But that type of a tendency of, like, whatever, every decision I make is going to be perfect anyway, so no problems whatsoever, I'm just going to make them based on whatever whim I have. Whereas Gideon's like a real person, right? He's just like, "I don't know if this is the right thing to do, but I have to make a call because everybody's staring at me, so it's going to be this one." And, like, he says it with conviction and assurance, and that's something that you brought up as well that I thought was amazing, the way that you put it, where Gideon says something, and, like, he says, you know, "This is what we're going to go do, let's go do it," and gives the orders, like, "You're coming with me, you two go this way and do this, you two go do this," or whatever. And everybody shouts, "Yes, sir!" And they say, the story says, Jace joined in with the "yes, sir," without even realizing that he was going to say it with them until he was saying it.
Yeah, right. Until he heard his own voice join in the thrum.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
He didn't realize that he was doing it.
Yeah.
And I said, some men are mind mages simply with charisma.
Right. Because Jace could have made everybody do that.
Right.
But it would have taken a lot. And Gideon just talks, and everybody's like, "Yeah, hell yeah!"
And they don't even realize
Right.
how invested they have become.
Right. Well, and think about it, right? All the people that shout for Zendikar with Gideon, even in the last story, where the second time, right, after they did it the first time and they were super gung-ho, and then a ton of them died.
Yeah.
And then they regroup, they go do it a second time, and Gideon's like, "Well, they're not going to be as joyous this time,
Right,
but whatever.
because...
We have to shout for Zendikar." And all of them, just as raucously the second time, shout for Zendikar.
Right, and he's really worried because he feels guilty
Yeah.
about the fact that so many of them didn't make it through that first battle.
Yeah.
And so he's really thinking that, you know, they're going to be... they're going to blame him for that. And they didn't.
Right. Well, and think about, you know, it's interesting, right? Obviously, this story is...
Even if he might actually be to blame for it.
Yeah. This, don't forget, I mean, not that you would forget, but this is a good reminder that these stories have a game associated with them, or vice versa. This game has these stories associated with it. So Gideon's ability to rally the troops, rally the ranks even, is a very white ability in that there are so many cards that we've seen over the years. You know, how many times do you see creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn, right? And vigilance, or whatever it is, like whatever the other ability is, or one creature gets +2/+2, everybody else gets +1/+1. Like those are white abilities, right? And here you're seeing it. Gideon has the ability to give orders and then say, now go do it. And everybody's like, yes, right? Everybody is in. They are inspired. They're ready to go because of this one.
He buffs the party.
Right. Because in this case, because of this one man, but because of this one person's ability to do that. And yes, he's a bard, I guess, in that way. But yeah,
very strategic bard.
But just, you know, yeah, bards in Magic are white, confirmed.
Okay.
No, definitely not. I'm relatively certain the bards we've seen have been green, but who cares? That's fine. But yeah, it just...
Green is the best color.
It's so flavorful that is something that Gideon can do, because it's something that white as a color is traditionally known for being able to do. So that's really good. I loved when it got to Jace's perspective, and we have Jace seeing/meeting Kiora for the first time, and he calls her the Merfolk wild card before he knows her name.
Because it's very easy to tell that is in fact what she is.
Yeah, she very much made that known. I've known people like that too, by the way, where like people are like actually sitting down and trying to have a discussion, and that one person is like, I know what to do. We're like, okay, you don't know what to do, just chill. We'll all talk. Like, you have an idea, and that's a cool idea. We've heard it. Let's mull it over and look at some other ideas. But my idea is the best. Okay, cool. Let's look at some other ideas, though. But my idea is going to work, and nobody else's is. So, like, I get that. And you know what's funny? I've totally been that person.
Me too.
For better or worse, I've been that person.
I thought you were talking about me.
I wasn't. I was talking about me. 100% I've been that person. Where you're like in a class with me. So I'm so sorry if you've had to deal with somebody like this and you lose a little bit of respect for me right now. But I'm the person, and I've tried to change this over the course of my life, but I was the person who in class, like the teacher would be like, hey, has anybody ever had this experience in their life? Doesn't matter whether I had that experience or not. My hand would go up. I would try to explain a story or something. Looking back on it, there's no way it was related at all. But I needed to be that kid who had his hand in the air to answer that question. I just needed to. And to have all the other people in the room be like, no? And be like, oh, okay. And then just sit there quietly as somebody like actually, with something actually relevant to say, speaks up. So, apologies if you ever dealt with that person and you disliked them. Like I said, I'm working on it, I promise.
I don't know if that's exactly what you were saying. I mean, her idea is not a bad idea.
Sure.
It's not irrelevant.
Sure.
It just isn't what everyone wants to do.
It's not the only and the best,
or they just want some time to come up with multiple ideas and figure out ways to implement them.
Right. And she's very impatient.
She just wants to do. And that's very much how I am. Less so now, but when I was younger, yeah.
Sure. Growing from and learning from our experiences in life. What a concept. But I loved how Jace talked about the Bident, because Kiora couldn't stop talking about the Bident.
Yeah.
And Jace's line about the Bident was, he notices her waving her annoyingly long seafood fork.
Yeah. Well, and
bravo! It's so good.
And my point was, she kept on talking about how wondrous this Bident was, and I'm like, bitch, when you brought it over here, it stopped being magical.
But it didn't. She showed it off. I thought the same thing, and I wrote it down. She showed it off. She showed the wave coming up and coming through the window. It just changed its appearance because that aspect of Nyx, right, with the stars or whatever going through it, is not available on other planes.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what happened.
I gotcha.
I think.
I was thinking like a D&D thing where like the weapon broke moving from plane to plane.
Sure.
And so your enchanted item's no longer enchanted.
Sure. I think it may have just lost some of its power, but not all, in that, like, it changed to that coral look, right? It was pink then instead of the glowing and the stars and everything in it. But obviously, as she showed, it was still able to, like, pristinely call up that wave that, like, shot through the window, didn't touch any of the sides of the window, despite that it's water, and water is super hard to contain and control and etc. Not necessarily
form to certain shapes and stuff.
Right. Not necessarily for mages, but still, that's real exact to bring a whole wave up and then send it through a window without it touching anything on the sides. Like, so, but I thought the same thing. Because when you mentioned it, I totally agreed with you. It's just, the story made it seem like it is still powerful, just not weapon of a god powerful anymore. It's just, you know, it's a powerful weapon.
Well, that's my point.
Right. Yeah.
It's not the same weapon that Thassa wielded.
Correct.
And maybe that's just because she's wielding it and she's not as powerful as Thassa.
Correct.
Or it's because it changed planes of existence. But either way, if it can't do what the Thassa's Biden could do, then it's not really the same weapon anymore.
Yeah. We have...
It doesn't mean it can't work.
Yeah.
Or at least be helpful towards working.
Although we saw none of that in this story.
Right. No.
At all. But, speaking of which, as Kiora is about to leave, Jace, seemingly, because they didn't really say this, but you could tell Jace was, like, desperate to keep her there. Right? Because he felt like she was the one, or one of the ones, like they needed everyone to solve this problem. And actually, I guess what they did tell us, that Jace was concerned that if she left and hurt Ulamog enough, he would leave, right? So Jace did mention that, so my mistake on calling that out that way. So he was afraid that if she left, it would mean that Ulamog would leave too, based on how much it was hurt by the Bident. And so as she is walking out the door to get onto her octopus tentacle to leave, and sorry, I said door.
She's a boss.
I said door. Window. As she walked out the window to get onto this octopus tentacle, Jace enters her mind. And he's like, please, you don't want to do this. Which, they don't say that he's influencing her to feel that way, but... he probably is, because otherwise why wouldn't he say it out loud? And she...
if it's an embarrassing thing to say out loud.
Maybe.
You know, if she's being really stubborn and he's like, you don't want to do this! You know, then she's going to be like, okay, dude, bye. You know, but if he goes in her mind and says, look, you don't want to do this. Like,
be aware.
It's really important
that
you listen to me. And you can't not listen to me right now because I'm in your mind. You know, that I can see how that would be much more significant.
It's just, it was interesting to me because we got that moment of Jace entering her mind, whether he was influencing her or just talking to her. Either way, she was not a fan. And Jace would have died if Gideon wasn't there. Or at least been injured and attacked and hit if Gideon wasn't there. Because she attacks him with the Biden. And Gideon pushes Jace out of the way, deflects the blow with his invulnerability shield, or just in general with his like shield or whatever, his buckler. And she is like very upset. She's like, you don't want to do that again. And then she, you know, I think makes a final plea to Nissa and then leaves. And that's the last we see of her in the story. So, like, she was a lot of talk, and then, not that I wanted there to be more in this story, but we didn't see her or hear about her again specifically. Like I said, there was a lot of discussion of the water making a lot of noise and whatever, and that may have been her sea creatures, but we have no idea whatsoever. So, maybe we'll see in the coming weeks, who knows. Then we have the most important interactions in this story with future implications. Whether we knew it at the time that we originally read it or not, we know now. And that's Nissa and Jace. Because these two had such interesting interactions with one another.
Yeah.
And as we now know, we all now know, if we recall from the stories and the sets, Nissa eventually becomes part blue. And this, I think, is where it starts. Is where you see the first hints of it. Because Nissa first has the feeling where Jace is looking at the illusion in his hand of the Hedrons. Right. Now it's funny. Maybe maybe in my subconscious I remembered it, but in my mind I'm going, why doesn't he just have the illusion massive so that they can fit the Hedron exactly where it's supposed to go inside of the illusion? And I thought that to my, it happens later, spoilers, but it was like, I thought that, and again, whether that was my subconscious remembering it or I've just played games before, some modded Minecraft where you have to put particular blocks in particular places. They'll do that where they'll let you have like a ghostly image of what it's going to look like, and so then you can place blocks in certain places where they're supposed to go so that you know where it's supposed to go and you're not off by 5 different times where you're like, okay, why doesn't it work now? So you can actually like set up an illusory copy of what it's supposed to look like, so you can go, okay, this isn't it, but the dirt block goes here, I'll put the dirt block here, the cobblestone goes here, I'll put that there, that kind of thing. And so I was thinking about that with this, and then later on they do it, so they solve that problem.
Right.
But Nissa points out that she finds it odd that Jace is looking at the illusory version of it as opposed to the real thing. Jace is all about his calculations, right. He's all about the illusion because it is exact. And Nissa is like, I just don't understand. If you look at how beautiful this is. Pick your head up out of your phone and look at the world around you. Right. That kind of thing. And I'm not taking that stance. I'm just saying that's similarly that mindset of like, why is that illusion better to you than the real thing? And we get the answer to that in 2 prongs. One, Nissa would be able to just look at the real thing because she sees the ley lines. Yeah. So she knows when they're connected exactly correct without needing to look at an exact illusory copy. Mm-hmm. And also, we find out later that Jace looks down at the illusion because then he doesn't have to look up at the devastation going on around him.
Right.
And that is, while unfortunate, perfectly understandable. It sucks because, be alert and aware of what's going on around you. You're part of this team, but also, it's not like, hey, Jace is an asshole. It's like, hey, this is kind of a problem. So,
yeah,
whatever.
It's, have some awareness.
Right.
Because, if you can't apply that awareness, you're going to fuck it up.
Right.
And it's not going to work.
Then we get to Jace entering Nissa's mind. And that is, again, was further information as to how Nissa can be a convincing blue mage. Or part blue mage. Because Jace is in her mind, Jace gets lost with all the things that he's being bombarded with, of how Nissa sees the world. Yeah. It's too much for him to take in. Yeah. And so he starts to fall out of her mind. And she catches him. And he is like, this is not a thing that happens when I'm in people's minds. That's not how this works.
It is now, right. Motherfucker.
And so even though she's a green mage, and he is a mind mage inside of her mind, she guides him through, as opposed to the other way around.
Which is so cool.
Yes, it's very cool. And also, there's that moment of Nissa, the two of them together, when they stretch the thing out, finally figure out where the one offset Hedron is, and Nissa goes to take care of it. And as she goes, she's like, I see it, I got it. And she goes away, and Jace is not in her mind anymore. And he's like, I didn't do that. I didn't consciously leave her mind.
Right.
In other words, he would have stayed there despite her no longer being physically present there. He would have been psychically present in her mind as she flew away or went away or whatever. But he realized that she was the one who was like, no, I don't want you to do that. And didn't kick him out, but he said the feeling was that even if he had wanted to stay, he might not have been able to.
Right. Or even that if he had actively tried to stay.
Right.
He wouldn't have been able to, yeah.
Yeah. And so...
Because it's not that he didn't want to stay.
Right.
He just didn't actively try to stay
right.
because he didn't realize he was being taken out.
Yeah. Yeah. And the last thing that I thought was funny, just based on what we know is coming up, because I only have one other thing to say. I don't know if you have more to talk about. But I guess I'll say another moment of good like storytelling now that impacts so far into the future, but that isn't what we're dealing with stories in modern times in 2021, where it's like, oh my God, what is the deal with Kasmina? Well, we won't know until the next time we see Kasmina, because they're not telling us a damn thing about her. What's the deal with the Phyrexians? Well, we won't know until the next time they're on a random plane getting something else. We have no idea. This isn't that. This is just a moment where Jace is like, wow, she's powerful. Okay, going back to it. But 5 sets from now, or whatever it is, when you finally see these Nissa become a blue mage, and you find out why, and you hear Yahenni, I mixed Nissa and Yahenni there. Yahenni discussing why she is part blue, or how he notices, or they notice that she is part blue. That is that moment where you're like, oh my God. And if you go back and read these other stories, maybe there's more like this, where you're like, oh, okay, that was an indication even way back then that she could be a convincing blue mage. It actually makes sense, as opposed to a black mage, which doesn't make sense, but she is in Zendikar Rising because they needed a black planeswalker, and they don't in any way indicate to you in the story that she should be. Nope. Anyway, but also it's just something that you can look back on and notice something that indicates something that will happen in the future without leaving you hanging for no reason on it. Huh, I wonder why she's like that. Guess we won't know until we see Nissa again. No, they didn't do that. They didn't need to resort to cheap, cliffhangery nonsense to get you to continue tuning into their stories, because they knew they were going to have a story a week for the next 2 years or whatever it was.
And they were going to be good.
Right. Because they were planning so far ahead.
Good enough that it would keep you coming back every single week.
Right. Now, the brief foreshadowing that we see here, that may not even be foreshadowing, but I thought it was funny, was Jace fiddling with his illusion. And again, maybe I'm reading too far into this. You're always welcome to give me your opinion. Maybe I'm reading too far into it, because God knows I could do that. Or maybe this is truly what they were trying to do. But Jace is trying to think of every eventuality to stall having to look up from his illusion. So he makes Ulamog come in faster, which is not a thing that Ulamog could or would do. He makes Ulamog
bigger,
like come in from the side. Well, no, that's the one I'm talking about. He doubled Ulamog in size. And that's where he goes, no, that's ridiculous. Is it though? Because Ulamog doubling in size isn't really a thing that happens until they draw all of them into the world. But that's not a problem for the Hedron Circle. What is a problem for the Hedron Circle is if there were, say, I don't know, another Eldrazi Titan that came out. But that would be ridiculous.
No
that would
way.
never happen. But if you were to double the size, what would happen? Well, it doesn't matter. That would be ridiculous. We'd have to make the door bigger, but that won't happen. So that was a moment where I was like, huh, okay, I see you, Kimberly Kryness and or the story team. I see you, because you know that Kozilek is coming out soon.
Kimberly Kryness.
Real soon. But they know that Kozilek's coming out real soon, because even at the end of the story with Ob Nixilis showing up, they know Kozilek's coming out real soon. So that was, to me, that was a foreshadowing moment as well. Was like, what would happen if it doubled in size? Could it still get through? It's fine. It's not fine. It's not real great. So I'd love people's thoughts on that as well. Let me know. Do you think I'm going too far into it, or does that make sense? Like, you know, it's not truly doubling in size because it's not getting like bigger, but there would be 2 of them. It's kind of doubling.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the end of the story. The story was long, like I said. Worth it? I think so. But I think that you could have had the meeting of the minds, so to speak, in story 1, and story 2 could have been the implementation and capture of Ulamog.
Right.
Like, have the first story end with... Oh no, I guess you couldn't have the first story end with Ulamog because that was while they were building the Hedron network, but still, you could have ended the first story after the meeting of the minds, and then, you know, everybody saying, yes, sir, and that's how it ends. Right? And then the second one is them building the Hedron network. You may have needed to, like, add a little bit more to the Hedron network thing, like describing, like, how that occurs or who's doing what, and give some other people, like, names or whatever. But I feel like that would have been a little bit better. Do I think that means this story's bad? No. But am I annoyed by the seemingly consistent error of, hey, it's the last story, let's make it really, 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 really long to tie up all these loose ends so that we can then move on to the next set of stories while we get all of this out all at once. It's very frustrating. So I get it, but I also don't get it.
Suffers when you do that.
And again, at this point, they were doing stories every week. So does it suffer? Again, the length of it is frustrating. Did I feel like there were lingering questions afterwards, like I felt with Strixhaven? No, I mentioned that earlier.
No. But what I'm trying to say is, like, I'm talking about Kimberly Gryness and how much I love her, but this isn't a story that felt like Kimberly Gryness. This wasn't a story that, you know, I swoon over Kimberly Gryness, but I don't swoon over the story.
Okay.
You know, and I think that I could have, if it had been divided into 2 stories.
Okay.
And given a little bit more heart.
Well, and like I said, my only guess is that it was the kind of thing where she was going to be writing about all of this, and even if they did split it up between 2 weeks, like, it could have been a scheduling thing, don't get me wrong.
Right.
Because at this point, they were writing a story a week no matter what, so they needed their schedules to match up with the release of Oath of the Gatewatch, the set. But it also could have been that they didn't want 2 weeks of the same author because they had so many different authors.
Right.
Now you don't have that. I mean, the side stories have different authors, but not always 5 side stories, 5 different authors, but still, like, 5 side stories, 3 authors or something. And then the main story these days, this is 2021, these days you have, the main story has 1 author, the side stories have a smattering of authors. And that's fine. I don't see an issue in that. And eventually, these stories got to a point where it was Alison Lures every single week because she was the only one left. And
she was the only one who didn't get canned. And
then they finally decided to call them the Magic Creative Team or the Magic Story Team or whatever they were called at that time. And it was like Alison Lures, Kelly Diggs, and like maybe one other person that I'm not recalling, which I apologize for, by the way, because they did do an incredible job around that period of time.
Yes, they really did.
As well as like an editor or 2 as well. And again, I don't recall their names, but props to them as well. They again, great people and did great work. But yeah, that's the end of this particular story. Obviously, we will be back next week because Oath of the Gatewatch is still a thing. We have a lot more stories to go, so stay tuned for those. I mentioned before, subscribing and ringing the bell helps out a lot. If you like this video, there's a button down below you can express that with. It's a little thumbs up, I promise.
Was I too close to you when I did that?
I don't think so.
You went like this?
Oh, I just wanted them to be able to see you. Maybe it was just a reaction because something was happening in my peripheral vision. But we would appreciate it if you would tune in for that. If you like Magic, we stream Magic Arena every Monday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, and if you're watching this the day it comes out or the day after it comes out, before 8 p.m., we stream on Fridays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be back this week with more of Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2. We're going through the PS2 Dragon Ball Z fighting games, and we are about to enter the Android Saga. We just started the Android Saga, which will likely take the entire episode or the entire stream if I had to guess, just based on how intensive this game is with the story mode. So I definitely encourage you to tune into that. We have 3 videos a week coming out on Video Games for All as well. Link down in the description box below. You can check that out, and you should subscribe there as well. We have Pokemon.
And that is where the VODs of the stream goes up.
Of the Friday streams.
Right.
Yes. The Magic Arena streams right here. But yes, absolutely. If you want, on Video Games for All, our series right now are going to be Pokemon Silver, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and a new Sunday series that we have not announced yet. I'm not going to do it here, but you can come join us on stream if you want to see, or just wait till Sunday. You'll see it then. But either way, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate each and every one of you hanging out. Let us know your thoughts there were a couple of questions, specific questions that we asked, but if you have other opinions about this story, about the method of story writing back then versus the method of story writing now, do you think we're being too harsh about comparing? I don't think we are this is infinitely worse in 2021, it just sucks. But at the same time, I do think it was better back then. A lot of people do, but I'm giving reasons why as opposed to just crapping on present day. I'm giving reasons. But if you disagree, we would love to hear from you. Let us know.
Right, please.
Absolutely. And that's in the comments down below. Continue the discussion. You can check out our socials as well. Links down below. And joining us in that discussion, joining your fellow commenters in their discussions as well, is a great way where you can join us as we show off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right. Like I said, we'll be back next week for more. I'm looking forward to finding out what happens with Obnixilis, this mystery demon that we have no idea who it is.
Right.
It's definitely Obnixilis. But we will find that out next week. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.